I'm just really grateful to be here. He just blew up my spot on, I treated myself to a convertible for the desert air, because I'm going to New Mexico tomorrow. So anyway, it's really fun to be here. I've lucked out with the weather, and I got a great tour, so I'm really grateful for the hospitality. Oh wait, I should make this happen. There we go. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm treating this relatively informally, and I thought I might take the opportunity to do a little bit of complaining with you all. I feel like in a disciplined set of professions that's so relentlessly focused on solutions, sometimes that kind of solutions orientation can be a little gaslighty, and I feel like, I mean, tell me if you agree, but sometimes it feels to me as though by training our eyes all the time on fixing things, how they will be, we skip over a little bit of sensitivity, just observing how they are. So I wanted to do a little bit of that, just observation together of the fields and the work that we produce, and then turn our attention to not exactly the what of change, but the how. So thinking about the institution that I'm a part of, but also just more broadly, the kind of set of institutions that are available to us to make change. So recently, I was in San Francisco visiting a friend, and we were at a bar having a drink. Another actually really beautiful day like this, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, so we were catching up, including about work, and I think with a lot of my friends, there's like a sense of he's in architecture, but we don't really know much else. So he was just kind of asking about architecture today, you know? And I wonder if you all have had similar conversations. And he, maybe had a couple drinks and was pretty comfortable and felt comfortable enough to ask me. He was like, okay, I need to ask you a question. Why is architecture why is it so bad? Why is it? And then we're looking up and down some San Francisco street in the Mission, and he was pointing at really old, buildings up and down the block, comparing them to newer build, many of them 4 or 5 over 1 podium buildings. And he was, getting kind of snippy. And I don't know if you've had conversations like this with any of your friends, but I got pretty defensive pretty quick. And I kind of felt myself pushing the line like, okay, there are a lot of reasons why architecture is the way it is, and what is it about old buildings that you like? And he was talking about character and things like this that I don't know if, again, as I've told some other friends this story, I feel like there's a lot of similar conversations out there. Basically, his question was like, well, why can't it be like it used to be? Why isn't it as solid and good as it used to be? And we had a pretty good conversation, but it was a somewhat dispiriting for me. Anyway, I found myself, he sort of wasn't very receptive to my defensiveness. I wanted to revisit that today because I thought maybe you all would be a little bit more receptive to my defensiveness. It was helpful for me to think through that conversation as a way of, in my first year at the Architectural League, understanding the kind of work that we can do as institutions within our set of allied fields to change both the way we work and the work that we produce. So, and obviously, I hope it's clear that I'm not putting this image up that is from Wikipedia of a 5 over 1 in Austin or 4 over 1 in any way to impugn it. It just was representative, I think, as you all will recognize, of a lot of what goes up these days in a lot of places. So what I was trying to express to my friend that day is that architecture is really hard. It's really hard to do. And really good architecture is really hard. And that's for a lot of different reasons. We want it to be totally new and, blow our minds with its ingenuity, but it also really needs to be familiar and not too shocking to the senses. Similarly, it has to be, custom built, meet the exact needs of the project at hand. But increasingly and importantly, every component also needs to be reused, recycled, and reduced. It should be cheap, certainly. Please don't spend a lot of money. But also we need it to be big, and we need it to happen very quickly. Similarly, I think I said, yeah, it has to be creative and exciting, but architects also are tasked with being relentlessly pragmatic. Deeply interdisciplinary, but totally focused and researched. And also, we have to make beautiful things, but please don't make it be only about beauty. It has to be about a lot more. And behind the scenes, all of that sort of impossible compromise takes tons of work, but of course we all know that there's not tons of money to compensate everyone involved for that work. So that's just baseline architecture. It's been that way for a long time. And in some ways, we could talk about this, but in some ways it's those constraints that make it a challenge I think a lot of us take up. But maybe lucky for some of the masochists in the group, some of those conditions are getting even harder. Coming into the profession, student debt is at an all-time high. So you're not getting paid a lot, but you are entering with a debt load that you have to service. Architects are charged and excited to address improving equity with their projects. So thinking about the social networks that their buildings are a part of and improving them. But of course, they're building from the networks that are challenging in all kinds of ways. And I think expectations are really hard to manage in that sphere. Buildings need to not only be sensitive to their embodied carbon, but ideally produce energy. I mean, ideally buildings are carbon negative. And all of this is in a social sphere where projects are getting developed and zoning processes are getting moved through, and community board meetings are yours to navigate. And the systems of democracy, small d, at all scales are under threat and strained. So it's really hard, I guess, is what I'm saying, and I found myself unable to convince my friend that day in San Francisco that there are good reasons and a lot of really good intention that why architecture, broadly speaking, looks the way it does and works the way it does, and a lot of intent to improve that. So then my question is, what are the systems in place to help us make it better and easier? Both of those things. So baseline, the institutions that are always meant to be there to address how we build. One is school. So this is Columbia. I don't know. There's a lot of Columbia University in my bio, as you caught from Oscar's introduction. So this is actually Columbia's main administration building. For me, it just stands in for a kind of heavy, steeped in history kind of institution. Obviously, universities of all sizes, there's a lot of resources and increasingly come with a lot of cost. And each in their own ways have challenges to access in addition to cost that are being addressed unevenly, but nonetheless being addressed. This is the AIA National logo, another system in place to help us think about and change the way we practice is licensure, and the professional organization that come with that. So there's the AIA, but there's also the comparable institutions for landscape and preservation. Anyway, there are other ones, but they're basically institutions that exist by virtue of being a licensed architect. You become part of these organizations. So similarly to schools, there's a large member base, which provides a lot of resources, but it also limits agility, comes with certain barriers to access, and the questions they're able to ask, given their really broad base, are often maybe less than inspiring, not so critical. So, school and the profession are kind of the universes of institutions that are available for practicing architects of all stripes to spaces in which they can reflect about how they work, and ideally have some agency to affect change in that sphere. But there's a real risk in these systems simply sustaining some of the problems of our fields. I'm rewatching Veep. I don't know if you all watched that show with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but I'm rewatching it, and I couldn't resist putting this in. She runs for president, I think a second time, and her tagline is continuity with change. And sometimes I feel like the mantras of these institutions preach a lot about change, but don't end up delivering too much. So what are other institutions? What are other structures? What are other opportunities that architects, landscape architects, historic preservationists, developers, everyone who works in the worlds that imagine, make, manage, sustain the built environment, what other organizations or institutions exist or might exist that can help us address some of those really difficult conditions that make it difficult to practice good architecture? I think that so academia has all kinds of worlds of continuing education, and licensure has, there are different kinds of trade organizations that aim to address this, as I was saying. But what of third spaces or other kinds of organizations that purport to be able to do something different? So the Architectural League of New York is the organization that I just took the helm of as of September of last year. And we are a nonprofit that has been around almost as long as the AIA. 1881 we were founded. So some of our histories and even iconography, I think, resonates with both actually the last two slides, a kind of Beaux-Arts history, thinking from the same moment in history, we were founded in an era when the professions were really coming to define themselves and structure how they worked. But the League, even though it was formed in the same moment in time, is not academia, nor is it practice. So what is it? And this is a question I'm inviting you all to sort of answer with me, because we actually have quite a bit of flexibility about how we operate and what it is we take on. I show this old picture. This is from those early days, and it's emblematic of the moment. It's a lot of rich white guys, coming together to talk about each other's work, pat each other on the back, offer each other crits. Some admirable things, but also not the greatest sort of carried with it a lot of the problems of the day. So I put this on here to say that we're actually a member-based organization, but you don't have to be a member to take part in what we do. But one sort of balance we try to strike is, how do you create this third space without becoming a club, basically? So it's an ongoing question that we've been asking for 142 years. And we're trying always to create community without becoming insular. So, so we were founded in 1881, just 15 years out from the Civil War, which is wild for me to think through. It's been a long time that we've been asking ourselves who we are and what we can do to improve the allied fields. Our mission has always been anchored in advancing the art of architecture. In these early days, we always wanted to involve non-architects. So we've always had sculptors, photographers, artists of various kinds as part of the group, what they used to call the allied arts, or even applied arts, like as in literally applied to the building. No? There we go.
Sorry.
Can you restart it?
No, I just need to reshare. Where is that?
It's sharing. Sorry, everybody. Here we go.
There we go.
Cool. So advancing the art of architecture was always at the core of what, from the beginning, what the founders hoped that we might do. But what that means is pretty loose. So Oscar read briefly just this last December. So we've just updated our mission. And, oh shit. Am I doing this? Mission and our new sort of action verb, there we go, is support. So the Architectural League of New York supports critically transformative work in the allied fields that shape the built environment. And Oscar read the rest of the mission, which is really important and articulates the interrelated nature of the challenges we face. And it's addressing those challenges that for us is what qualifies work as critically transformative. But I was just hoping to talk through the idea of support with you all today as a kind of key, the center of what we understand our work to be. So whereas in those early days of this, hopefully I won't send it off, but I think that the early mission of the League, and honestly one that, and this sort of vibe, for lack of a better word, one that carried through until the last even 15 years, was the Masters. It was kind of a Beaux-Arts model. The Masters inspiring younger generations to do their best work. And this recalibration around support, we've really been thinking about it as, no, people want to do really hard work. They want to do that ambitious climate work. They're not naive to the challenges of the day. It's just really hard to do that work. So we're trying to ask ourselves, what do they need? What resources might we marshal to make that work just a little bit easier? Then the question becomes, how do we do that? So I wanted to run through just a few of the tools or the ways that the Architectural League works before we talk a little bit about the what. But I really am focusing today on the kind of infrastructures of change. So from our side, one sort of arena that we work in is the production of knowledge. This is similar to how academia works. We, among other avenues for that production of knowledge, we have an arrangement with the New York State organization where we give out $10,000 grants across the state for independent research projects. We've been doing this for a few years now, and it's a really exciting. We find that the league or this NYSCA, this state organization, found that they couldn't get the word out. They couldn't create sort of focused conversations in architecture and design the way that we could. We were well positioned to connect them to an audience that they wanted. And we produce these projects or we support independent individuals and teams producing these projects, and we do programs with them. They put them in dialogue, all kinds of things from material explorations to things that become exhibitions to design studies that end up getting built. So it's really all over the map, but we're supporting these independent projects, and that's just one example of the kind of research that we help generate. Another is through our publication, Urban Omnibus, who's actually in its 15th year, which is largely about New York City-based projects, but I really encourage you to check it out because it's really about city making more generally. And there's a lot of amazing work that has happened in there now for 15 years. This is showing there's a whole series of initiatives we're working on now about the Cross Bronx Expressway, but, excuse me, it's part of a larger set of initiatives that we could talk about maybe later if there's time in the Q&A, but about infrastructure and class and how the large government investments in infrastructure make space for built environment professionals to intervene in some of these really large-scale, ambitious projects that weren't around even just 5 years ago. So something as big as the Cross Bronx Expressway is now being reimagined, and it's exciting for us to figure out how to be involved. And Omnibus leading the way in sort of making some discursive space for that to happen. We also have a project that we're doing together with the Urban Design Forum, which is another nonprofit, actually, peer organization sort of in this space, called New City Critics, where we are supporting individual and actually groups of emerging writers, reporters and writers on the city, to explore topics of interest to them and really sort of jumpstart their careers in criticism, which is a space, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that is less and less supported, with newspapers slashing any writing and sustained writing they have around cities and the built environment. So we're just entering actually the next month. Yeah, next month we're going to put out a call for if any of you happen to be in New York or want to come be in New York. It's a 9-month fellowship that starts in September and runs through basically the academic year, where there's support for developing writing of various forms with amazing outside critics we bring in. So it's a whole curriculum and sort of world of writing and reporting that this is generating that's really exciting, and all within the Omnibus sphere. So that's the production of knowledge, broadly speaking, just a few examples of that. We also do a lot of work that I'm thinking of here as exchanging knowledge, so just bringing people together who are doing interesting work and need a venue and critical frames through which to share it. So we have ongoing series every year called Current Work that's really just a venue to explore recent work in the built environment. This year we've themed it around the concept of accessibility and trying to think intersectionally, learning lessons from organizers in the disability justice space about what accessible spaces means, broadly speaking, well beyond the ADA. So this is just an upcoming event we have around schools and thinking about neurodiversity, among many other ways of thinking about different minds and bodies. And on the right, this is some images from a series of events we did around making art museums more accessible and inclusive. So, Current Work. This is a podcast we have with MIT's Critical Broadcasting Lab called I Would Prefer Not To, where Anna Majewski is a professor there, and she's been interviewing. This is season 3. It's really an amazing podcast that's all about projects or commissions that are refused. So she interviews architects about jobs that they could have taken on but said no to. Why that happened, what the systems in place in their office were that allowed for that to happen, or sometimes she gets people to say jobs they took but wish they hadn't. And so she's trying to build an archive about projects that are a lot harder to learn about because they haven't gotten built. And as you might imagine, there are a lot of reasons that architects might not want to take on projects, or sometimes take on projects that they have mixed feelings about. And so this is a really sort of incredible space, the 3 seasons of this podcast, to explore some of those themes. And she really gets a lot of architects to open up about those systems and sort of their concerns. So we also have a few long-running programs that I know you've had some alums come through here of a few of our prize series. Emerging Voices has been running for, I think, approaching 35 years. It's a invited competition for architects and practitioners in the built environment who are, for lack of a better word, sort of hitting their stride. So people who have established careers. I think one way to think about it is kind of mid-career, but that's not exactly right. Anyway, some amazing built work. But it's not always built. Sometimes people's practices are research-based, so there's a lot of exhibitions and other forms of alternative practice that get highlighted with the winners of the Emerging Voices series. And it's become an incredible archive, these 30 years of winners to look back through on our website. There's videos of, I'm not sure all the way back to the beginning, but year over year of lecture videos from Emerging Voices that I really encourage you to check out, and we put them in dialogue with one another, again, thinking about how all the work that they're doing might be put in conversation with other people, other peers. League Prize is another 30-some-odd year competition that we run that's really for people who are right out of school. So within 5 years, I believe, of school, We theme these, so this is some of the recent themes from the League Prize. And again, for years there's been an exhibition that comes out of this, so winners organize exhibitions either online. In COVID it became a digital thing, but for years it was in a gallery in New York. And these are often, given that they're younger practices, they're often way more research-based, differently experimental, but it's another really incredible archive of practices that really mark a moment in time and show the sort of like broad range of practices that exist. And it's a really cool way to check in on sort of like what was happening in 1997. Exhibitions, so this is League Prize exhibition that I just mentioned, just to give you a sense of another sort of format related to some of those works. And honestly, we're hoping to get this going again now that we're entering a sort of, I hesitate to say post-COVID, but we're entering some kind of new pandemic moment that might allow for that again. And so another thing that we've been doing sort of off and on for a little while that I'm really keen to do more of is to bring people together in space in ways that are sort of less wide open in public, like a big Emerging Voices lecture is one thing, but we've been doing more roundtables in our office, bringing together, so this is a roundtable we hosted maybe a month ago with 3 representatives from 3 different practices in New York whose offices have been organizing unions. And so they came in, and this was organized as a part of a mentorship program that we have, so it was actually a self-organized thing, but we hosted and helped frame it and set it up, and people came who were just curious about what's the value of a union in an office, what are the different ways that might work. They were each at different moments in that process, so it was just an open, safe space to talk about something that is often a pretty contentious thing to either bring up or find ways to discuss, or and therefore a hard thing to learn about. So that was one example of a roundtable we did in the office. We've also had a recent roundtable with, and these are basically closed events, but big enough to be porous, so like 30 people, something like that. Again, intimate but dynamic. One with adjunct professors who are also in practice, coming together to talk about the challenges and opportunities of being both a practitioner and a professor. I think many people in the room will be familiar with a lot of those challenges, and we wanted to help provide a space where they could talk through some of those things, maybe begin to organize around questions of either organizing within their academic institutions or thinking about learning lessons from how people manage that balance. And another example of these roundtables is one coming up for Latinx practitioners that was also self-organized, but we're really happy that the League is a space that they felt like they could come to get together, like literally get together in space, but also an infrastructure they could use through which they could reach out and do some critical self-reflection. So another form of work is advocacy, and this one is a little hard to define, but nonetheless I think we see it as an important part of our work. So this example is a project we have with another New York State agency where we help insist that design, what they call design excellence, be considered as part of a statewide project about driving down carbon emissions in new multifamily buildings. So absent the Architectural League's involvement, intervention, all the metrics were just going to be technical ones about, about embodied carbon and emitted carbon from these buildings. But we were able to build in another jury that speaks about context, about the history of the site, about accessibility of various forms, material quality, all kinds of things like that. And the projects that are coming out of this this statewide initiative are certainly have improved. I mean, they're really amazing things. Big, we're talking big, hundreds and hundreds of unit sized buildings. So really ambitious already, but it's been great to see the conversation around design excellence shift as a part of our involvement. And so that's advocacy. I like to think of that as advocacy for the profession, but in a broader sphere. We also, i.e. with developers and all kinds of outside, energy consultants and others who are involved in that, but that might might not be asking the same questions that architects and people who love architecture are. This is another form of advocacy, which is about affecting change outside of the profession that then changes the conditions in which we work. So American Roundtable was a project that the League initiated in 2020 that was assessing and understanding, I mean, you can see the text here, the conditions in what they called then small and mid-sized communities across the United States, where design was playing an important role in how some of these places were addressing their various challenges. And I'm working on an update to this project that's all about working communities and thinking about class. So stay tuned for that. But advocacy in different ways. Then there's a whole other sphere of advocacy, which is really, this is Darren Walker, who's the head of the Ford Foundation, and we have a sort of our fanciest prize is called the President's Medal. And we tend to award it to people outside of architecture, but who have real influence on our fields. So we try and, again, emphasize in different ways the sort of interconnectivity of our work and make sure that people in the halls of power outside of architecture are paying attention to our priorities. So this last category of ways in which we work, I called strengthening ties, but I think we could probably come up with a better name. And this is really just bringing people together. Like, it's a little bit the version of the roundtables that I was just talking about, but we've found, I think, over the years, but especially in the last few years, that people really relish the opportunity to like get together in space, learn about their peers' work, critique it in a productive, pleasant way, as we learn how to do in school. So we have a number of ways that we do this. We have a mentorship program. This is a shot from our most recent orientation that we organize with the 3 public universities that have architecture programs in the New York City area. And it's an incredibly strong program that doesn't get the spotlight it deserves, but we're looking to grow it beyond architecture. The people involved, mentors, repeat, serve year upon year, and the students often who move through who mentees come back and become mentors, and it's just really a wonderful community that we're able to help support. We do a big party every year, but again, it might seem silly, but we've found over the years that people really value getting together with peers and talking about their work or not, just really sort of, again, community building. And it might seem, it's a little silly to think about this as part of the job, but these are unique spaces that actually wouldn't otherwise exist in some of those other more differently formal institutional spaces. And then finally, we have a series that's called First Fridays, that's basically just monthly get-togethers where offices show off the work that they've been doing, and it's really fun. Basically, they host all of our members to come, and people put up projects they've been working on. It's like a version of what happens at school, but in the office, and they always fill up in like 2 seconds. I'm really blown away by the demand for these things. People love sharing their work that they do. They don't never get the chance to do that once you're in the office. I think only prospective clients, come by and see what's cooking, and your peers, for all kinds of different reasons, want to come see it. And so it's another really heartwarming space to be able to host. So, okay, so then if those are all the how we do things, I wanted to just return to this as background to talk through a few of the what's, or the priorities for what we're focused on in terms of themes or challenges of the day. And I'm just sort of training myself to see the architecture around me a little bit more sensitively as we think through some of these challenges. So one area that we're working on very hard, and everyone is and needs to be, is housing, of course. Trying to figure out how to move toward both a social and a professional alignment that reinforces the right to housing. How to think about a right to housing in a world where not everyone has the right to have rights, as they say. So thinking about racial violence, gender inequity of various kinds, disability justice, as I mentioned before. We're trying to bring those themes into everything that we work on. Economic insecurity, I mentioned, is something we are increasingly trying to train our gaze on with real focus and thinking about class. Again, it's not something that maybe the American Institute of Architects is able to develop a big program on class for different reasons, given their size and sort of the way they're involved in. Again, I mentioned they have such a broad base, it makes it harder to do focused, more critical projects or address critical themes like this. So that's something that we're keen to invest in. And then, of course, climate change. Everything needs to be thinking about eliminating, pulling the economy away from fossil fuels. All of this I think you know, but I wanted to return to these as the themes we're working through and offer basically the channels that I just went through as the ways where I, new in this role, am trying to, the spaces in which I can test how to address some of these themes. Oh, finally, I should say, democracy is, of course, a big one, and we're also very attuned. We'll see how this year goes, but we want to be very attuned to the protection of speech and protocols to channel participation fairly. So I feel really strongly that organizations like the League are uniquely positioned to make a unique difference in how we do what we do, but given their uniqueness, or our uniqueness specifically, but I guess I also want to offer that there are other Pew organizations around the country. There need to be more. It's a flexible space that we ought to be organizing in more often. I think they can make a real difference, but they need to be leaned into. And so I think with your creative energy, input, thoughts, we can make architecture both easier and better. So I offer this just plug. You can check out our website. There are a lot of ways to become involved, including by becoming a member. But I also encourage you to figure out what possibilities like this might exist here or in the professional spheres you're in or about to enter to make some of those changes locally. So thank you very much.